So I'm an unfamiliar face to most of you, but I'm very familiar to two of your cohort members. My name is Allison Lowe, and I'm a faculty member who used to work at Chatham University with Carrie the Charity and Mary Whitney, and now work at Carlow University in Pittsburgh, and I am Mary's external reader and a great friend and fan of Carrie. So I'm here to introduce Mary to you as my friend, my colleague, and soon to be Dr. Mary Whitney. And I'm extremely honored to introduce her because when I think of Mary, the two words that come to mind for me are scholar practitioner. And I think you will see in the work that she presents today that the work she has been doing is the integration of not only her career, her passion, but also an extraordinary level of work in terms of scholarly production, in terms of methodological sophistication, and in terms of integrating her connection to multiple communities of practice. So before we let her begin, we want to acknowledge some people who are here. Thank you to her chair. Randall, where'd you go? There you are. Dr. Randall Amster, who just deferred to me to introduce her. Thank you. Dr. Pramod, where'd you go? There you go. Farjali, thank you for letting me introduce her too. Dr. Susan Sterrett from Chatham University, who's not with us, but with us in spirit here today. She's back at Chatham. Representing Chatham is Dr. Marie Connolly from the Economics Department, who is a sometimes Arizona resident, and so is here on her behalf. And most importantly, Mary's husband, Larry. Long-suffering. Long-suffering, but incredibly important to this process, so thank you all for being here. So here's Mary to talk about voluntary university sustainability agreements.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. This was actually the entry screen on my original defense, the entrance lobby. This is actually, someone gave me permission to use this. This is someone's visualization of what a defense might actually look like. I just think it's one of the best ever, so I just use it. They're loud. This is delete bombs, in case you can't see what those are. And they're shooting red ink everywhere, which is kind of what mine looks like. So my topic is voluntary university sustainability commitments. I am a sustainability coordinator at Chatham University, and some of you may remember that I was actually talking about a transition group as my original focus of study. That group disbanded, and I was struggling to come up with, am I going to find a new group? Am I going to come up with a new topic? I was in the middle of working on our STARS report for Chatham. I was in the middle of making sure we had all of our American College University President's climate commitment reports done. And suddenly it hit me one day as I had them all spread out in front of me. Wow, this is a transition. This is actually a transition at an institutional level. Bingo, the dissertation fairy came back, gave me a new topic, and so we have it. So my work relates to complexity, wicked problems, and transition. As you know, wicked problems is climate change is the super wicked problem. What you're seeing here is a map of states that were signed to the original Kyoto Protocol. And I think one of the reasons why this slide is so important to me and why I troubled to include it is that it actually shows a progression. Now watch what we're going to do. This is the first Kyoto Protocol period, 2008 to 2012. And you can see that the dark gray are parties that agreed to reduce their carbon emissions. Now we've got the 2013 to 2020 commitment period, and you've got a completely different map. So there's obviously things happening. But please notice, make sure it gets right. The United States is not a participant here. We are a participant, but look down at what we are. We're a signatory country with no intention to ratify the treaty. However, the United States has made a 19% reduction in our carbon footprint in that time. So therefore, something at a different level than the national level is actually driving this change. So what must it be? Certainly not the national government that's doing it, so there has to be something else happening. We withdrew from Kyoto in 2001, so there's a big hole. But I think what we're seeing is actually at the institutional level. So this is going to move on now. I'm going to give you a little bit of transition background. Does anybody know what this is? Do you recognize this? This is the Kearney Cut in Nebraska. What this is like the perfect American example of path dependency. We travel in the same direction all the time. We make paths. Eventually, they get worn. Eventually, it gets easier to follow in the path. And eventually, as with the Kearney Cut, Rosemary, hi. Sorry, co-members, surprise appearance. It's just as easy. You can't even get out of the rut. You're stuck in it. This was actually one man with one plow cut made essentially a cut in the prairie grass to mark a path for a supply train to a Fort Kearney. And it actually changed Nebraska. It ended up, Lincoln was closer to this cut than Omaha, which was the original capital, and so they moved the capital rather than move this path. So what we've got here is basically lock-in, right? It was like the decision has been made, this is where things are going, and everything else is going to follow the path. So lock-in is a problem with super wicked climate change. Every transition we try to work on brings a whole new problem. So what is this? Does anyone know what this one is? People from Pittsburgh might, but some other people might. This is the first gas station in America. And it's actually from Pittsburgh. It's actually right down from our university, as a matter of fact. Because if you're going to have cars, and they're going to run on electric, there was a transition here. The original cars were electric. The Baker electric cars were more popular. The Stanley steamer cars were more popular than gasoline cars. And then the gas car came and everything changed. We have a gas station now. And so now we're building up this regime. A regime is sort of like the structure of interlocking systems that connect, and you can't change anything without changing everything. And so if you're going to change things, you have to think about changing everything. If you're going to change to electric cars, what's happening to the gas stations? Where are they going to go? So we're going to have electric cars. Now this is really interesting, but this gets back into some of our problems. Plug-in cars are a really big deal. This is also up the street from Chatham. But if you're thinking about making a change and you're thinking about all these interconnected systems, if you're thinking about a wicked problem, you can't change anything without having to change everything, right? But what we find is that in some places an electric car is not actually going to reduce pollution. It is not going to reduce emissions. If you're in any of these states up here, if you have a plug-in electric car, you just increased your emissions. Actually, you did not reduce them. So what you see here, the yellow line is actually the hybrid car baseline, and then the dark gray is carbon emissions. And if you look, all electric cars in several of these regions, the emissions are actually going to go up. So therefore, this is a really wicked problem, right? You think electric cars are going to solve it, and it may not. You're going to have to dig a little deeper into the transition. If you're in the Netherlands, you think about it in a completely different way. Maybe we need to just work on bicycles with electric cars. And then you start coming up with all sorts of new problems. This is actually in Eindhoven, where I was this November. This is a bike ring that basically bypasses the highway beneath. They found that as they were expanding the suburbs, and more people would probably ride, that they were afraid to cross this road on a bike. So rather than just have a crazy kind of little ramp or something, they developed this huge, beautiful ring. It's actually a bridge. That's the central support, and it actually is a suspension bridge. And it is awesome. And you can go online and look it up. There's beautiful videos of it. So this is the idea of sort of like transitioning, thinking about doing things a different way. And it takes a lot of change, and it takes a lot of work to get it to do that, to break out of the regime that you've set up for yourself, which in this case is cars. So regimes are complex, they have a lot of interconnections, there are patterns that are followed, there are a lot of normative structures that are built in, so if you're going to change things, you have to look at all of this. So basically I've decided through my research that universities might be how that is accomplished, because we have a lot of things that other people don't. We have the ability to plan ahead, make some changes. This is actually Chatham. We have some gratuitous Chatham pictures in here. But this is our Eden Hall campus, where it's designed to be from the ground up, net zero energy based. So every building has solar panels, but it still has problems. Or you can actually start making changes on your existing structures. This is actually the solar hot water system we installed on our 2 residence halls. But universities are sort of like the place that we can do this. We can break out of the path because we're an institution. We're an institution in a social sense as well, like higher education. We have very, very strong normative power in the world, and I think we need to use it. We can change structures. We can pursue new ideas and practices. And most importantly, we can connect those two things. So when we change a structure and we're looking at a new practice, we're really making a big change, because where do we make our changes? We pass them on to students, and then they go out in the world and they do other things. So I started looking at social learning for solving these wicked problems. Points if you know what that is. Does anybody recognize that from Pink Catholic School? That's the Code of Hammurabi. There's like different ways to do change. You can make rules. You can tell people what is expected behavior. You can provide a guideline. You can provide a map and a compass. Or you can scaffold the new behavior that you're wanting to see. This is Vygotsky's idea that someone who's learning actually can, with the help of someone a little bit more advanced, move someone ahead by providing support. If you're an institution and you want to move ahead and you're not quite sure how to do it, a voluntary agreement that you sign can actually be that scaffold for you. So what I started looking at are the different sorts of agreements and how they're scaffolding institutional change. And there are quite a lot of them. So I looked at 6, and I wanted to get a wide range of variety in them. I chose the Tower Declaration, which was the first of the voluntary commitments. It's almost entirely curricular-based. It has a 10-point implementation plan. I'll go through all the details as we go if it comes up. ASHE is a membership association, so it's sort of their goal is to make sustainable practice the norm within higher education. They don't, though, require any sort of steps that you need to do, but they provide a lot of support and information. The American College and University President's Climate Commitment has this main goal of eliminating or offsetting greenhouse gas emissions, and it is a very structured program. This one is probably the biggest scaffold, if you're talking about scaffold. Tower is a simpler version of a scaffold. There's all kinds of mandatory reporting, which is sort of my life, and I think it's probably a bit of James Pitman's life, too. And the other 3 I looked at, the Princeton Review Green Schools. This is a public rating system, but it is not a ranking system. STARS is a program of ASHE. Here, it's a benchmarking and rating system. So this one has, as Carrie's research showed, there's a lot of stuff that you get points for. So it's essentially scaffolding. It's giving you a normative cue by what you get points for, like a school garden. And like you said, nobody wanted to admit it, but it's kind of suspicious that it all jumped up there just as this came in, because you get a lot of points for some things. And the newest one that I've chosen, there's an even newer one than this, but the International Sustainable Campuses Network. And this one has reporting requirements but does not mandate any actions. So I looked at it all through the lens of social learning theory, and I looked at everybody, but I'm not even going to talk about Dewey, I'm not going to talk about Maduro, I'm not going to talk about Cole today, only Vygotsky gets a 2-second mention, and then I'm looking at inter-organizational learning. It's learning between connected organizations, so it's sort of like above the institutional level. What it does is it gives you a wider choice of actions to try. It reduces the time you need to transform yourself because you can learn from other people. And it's a really good opportunity to disperse innovative practices. Network learning, when you're a network, you join together for one common cause. And you again have the opportunities to make multiple connections, increase the flow of information, diffuse knowledge through your membership, and you are essentially creating a shared space. Cognitively, you're making knowledge in a group. Cognitive practice sort of helps you make sense of this. If you can look at how a network looks at its world, how it creates new knowledge in the form of discourses, in the form of norms, in the form of regulations, how they construct, how they codify and institutionalize new ideas, which is where you get into the structure of agreements. And it looks at cultural practices and decision-making. So these are sort of the things that I looked at. And I drew really heavily on cognitive practice. This is Ironman and Jameson. So my research strategy and methods, I blended a bunch of stuff. So this is working from cognitive practice. They look at organizational, technological, and cosmological structures. Transition regimes have almost the same setup. I saw some really interesting correlations here. If you're looking to transition some system, you need to look at what are the regime's guiding principles, relations, markets, policies, regs, and the knowledge base. These are all organizational. So if you're looking down, you're looking at a particular theory. If you're looking across, we're looking at sort of like, what's the word I want? A concordance of structure and belief. Technologically, in a regime, they look at, of course, infrastructure, industrial structures are very important. And so, though, are cultural and symbolic meanings. So for my analysis methods, I ended up doing a network analysis. I can look at the extensiveness of a network, the mutuality, what are they engaged in together, what is their goal, and the dispersion of knowledge, and that's still an organizational cognitive practice. Network analysis lets you look at boundedness, like what are the agreements, what are the dimensions, how far does it go, which is technological. And then we've got intensiveness, like what is required, what is believed, and that goes all the way back to the cultural and symbolic and cosmological. And then situational analysis also looks at all these same things. Again, you look at, and so they all tie together. And I was really happy to be able to get this all to match up. Very nice. Because people are saying, why are you doing all these different things? I'm like, well, they're not all different. They're actually very similar, and each one of them has like a strength for finding out something specific. This is a really boring slide about methods I use and how I collected them. You don't need to see that one. So, where's Claire? Claire. I sent out a thing to the Prescott Cross cohort and said, oh my God, I have this huge list that I have to keep track of who's related to who. Does anyone have any ideas? And she said, try the brain. And that's this. And it worked really well up until I got to about my like 500, 600 school, and it suddenly became unmanageable. So I realized I was going to have to actually learn how to do social network analysis because there's no other program that can manage these connections. So I taught myself how to use Usenet, which is a program that does all the statistical analysis, and it does a very nice map of the network, but it's really kind of ugly. So it wasn't very appealing. That's the best I could get it to look. This is the best, but this is our network of agreements. So each of these central spots is one of these agreements, and all of these little dots are schools that participate in those agreements, and they're connected. But there's a better way. Gephi is a program that does network analysis and makes it gorgeous. And I'm a very visual person, and so I was one that, when I made this graph, everybody knows in the cross-cohort group, because I pretty much spammed the world and said, look what I made! But this is data visualized. So what we've got here, blue, how am I doing in time? Okay, blue is ASHE, green is the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, Princeton Green Schools, the Tower Declaration, International Sustainable Campus Network, and STARS. And what this is doing is basically an algorithm. And the more similar you are, the closer you are together, and the least similar you are, the farther apart you go. So there are less schools doing multiple things. STARS is kind of like its own little thing. And not that many people do anything but STARS. Yeah, so it's really interesting, right? Whereas all of these down here are doing many things. So there are a lot of network analysis measurements and dimensions that let you get at how connected people are, or people densely connected, or like just discretely connected. I could talk about those, but it would go into a lot of detail, and we can talk about those later. If anybody wants to know more about network analysis, I can talk about the measures that I discovered. But for now, because is that how much time I have left? Okay, thank you. So this one looks at, the other one's just who's doing what. This one looks at who's like the 800-pound gorilla in the room, who has the most connections of any, and that's ASHE. The darker the color, the more ties you have in common. You know, there are a lot of member schools, they have the most. Again, it follows pretty much the same pattern. International Sustainable is very new, and so it's small, it's less densely, it's less central. And then there's a measure, and this one is really important for research. This one is actually a measure, it's that exact same network. The only thing I did is I straightened the lines so that it would be a little bit clearer. I sort of manipulated the image to make now not the agreements connected and show, but between them. What you're seeing here, this color, are institutions that are participating in at least 2 of the agreements. And the aqua, they're doing at least 3 of these different agreements. And the darker, they're doing at least 4. And that one is Ball State, who does all 6. And so what does that mean? It's like, this is what I'm saying is our core of committed practice. This is sort of like the central, these are schools that are, you don't accidentally get into 6 different voluntary sustainability agreements. It's not like, you can get talked into one. You could even probably get pushed into a second one, but you don't get into all 6 or 5 or even 4 unless you're very, very serious about it. So you've essentially elected yourself into a network. You've elected yourself into a particular realm of cognitive practice. So, okay, 12 minutes. It's like, how do you push down like a whole year and a half's worth of work into 15 minutes? So yeah. So now I know who they are, right? And with network analysis, with the software I have at home, I actually, like, I can click on any one of those dots and see who it actually is. So I actually know who these are. They're not just dots. So then I look at them, and I started looking at the situational analysis. I'm looking at what are all the human and non-human actors, what's going on in this big network. I wanted to get at what do these networks think? What do they believe? What is their cognitive practice? So one of the things I developed was a situational map, so I started getting a sense of what's going on here, who's involved. We've got all the organizations that support these agreements. Who's not really mentioned by name, but is sort of in there? Who's implicated in all this? Students. Students, they're never specifically talked about except as we teach, or as in Carrie stuff, this is what we learn with our students. US Congress and the EPA, they're in there conspicuous by their absence, basically. They're not really related to any of this. They don't do anything. They're the hole that all of these networks are trying to fill. And so we look at a lot of different things. So I was able to sort of like get a sense of it. And then I did a grounded theory study, and from that I basically looked at what the agreements were saying themselves and between themselves about what they were doing. And I coded them, and then I put them into positional maps, another analysis tool for situational analysis. And basically, it lets you make the social structure of knowledge visible. And so I developed a couple codes. I looked at mission, and I saw that there were sort of like two main focuses here: action to protect ecological systems or to advance society. It seemed like it fell out on either end of that spectrum. And I compared those to vision. What is our vision for what this is doing? And I sort of discovered, I coded the concept of surveying, where we're actually laying out the boundaries. We're using a compass and a map. We're making a map. What is sustainable practice? Where are we going with this? And then orienteering. There's definitely a competitive dimension to some of these agreements. So I felt that orienteering was the same idea of laying out a map, but now we've made a game of it. Now we've made a race of it. Now we get points for it. And then I've laid out like who says what on these graphs, so you get a sense of what's going on. Like there's a fair amount, ACPCC, Green Schools, Tower, even the ISCN, they're actually looking to protect ecological systems. And then ASHE, in particular, and ISCN, they're more about advancing society. So they're sort of thinking of like the societal institutional level. So for mission, this gives you a sense of what is the mission of these universities. What are the methods? How are they going to fulfill that vision? And again, there's like an ecological orientation and a more socio-organizational one. And the central line on this one is the sustainable orientation. It combines both of those, right? It's a three-legged stool, and the center point is that. And then assessment. What are we doing? What are our methods for? Are they for action or are they for education? And again, I'm graphing, sort of like what people say about it. And if you look, Tower and STARS, I felt most closely aligned with a sustainable goal, a sustainable approach. And then the Green Schools and STARS sort of balance the idea of using education and taking action. So they're sort of on this central line. And you can see there's, you end up with ASHE and ISCN again over here. So now we're starting to see, you can actually see now what they're talking about. Because these are really messy. You have to go through like a lot of documents, newsletters and everything to even try to figure out what people are saying. But these positional maps are a really good way of showing what people think. And then this one probably, effectiveness in measuring. There were dimensions of using effectiveness in measuring for internal performance, for like internal improvement, or for external. Like, do we want credit? Do we get recognized for progress, like stars? Do we want credit for our fire, or school fire? Or are we more accountable to the public? There's a pretty strong dimension of universities, institutions having a very serious understanding and buy into their idea that it's the institutional role to do this to help society, like it's our mandate to help. And so there's a good bit of people who want to use this data very externally. And then I felt that there were like people who were interested in performance, like how we're actually doing. And then some people wanted to use that measuring, like all this stuff that we're counting and all these different agreements to inform future efforts, so you can plan better. And then this one came out like dead center. It's between external and external, internal, external, and it's between using it to perform and to plan. It's basically framing your progress through commitment. And both the Tower Declaration and International Sustainable Campuses did that one. So that's like the very first one and the very most recent one. So I felt that that was sort of almost like kind of the purpose of most of these agreements. All right. I think I have one more. Yeah, this one's roles and role models. And again, what do universities taking part in these agreements think that their job is? What do they think should be happening? And what is the cognitive practice of this bigger group? Teaching. A lot of them think that their goal is to teach. We're going to educate future leaders. We're going to educate the people who manage society. We're going to share our expertise and skills. We have a profound responsibility to teach for a sustainable future. The College and University President's Climate Commitment says we have a public mandate to educate. But there's also a really strong dimension of we need to actually do it. We need to put into practice what we say, what we want to teach. And so for that, we're going to take the lead and catalyze the action. The university is a leading lab, a microcosm of the larger community. And now look down here, we've got driving and directing. I felt that there were two really strong, these codes kind of came up from my data. The idea that we are driving society forward, or we're directing society. The original sort of image that I had was of a cattle drive, where you want everybody on the other side of the river. Are you going to shoot off some guns and just drive them into the river and they get over there and, you know, it's like big stressful drama, but we get there very quickly? Or are we more interested in standing on the other side of the river and saying, look at all the pretty grass. Don't you want to come over here? Look how nice it is, and encouraging the cattle to come across the river. And those two things, oops, I did it again. These two dimensions have like a power component. And Randall and I had some conversations about this, that how you think about whether your job is to drive or direct is going to directly impact how you teach, what you do. So we might expect to see with more research that the directing schools are actually working with their communities, working involved with like collaborative projects, whereas driving schools are going to be like, we're starting an initiative to do this, or we're going to have a new plan, and we're working with local government to make this happen, or with state government. So I felt that those two things were very, very distinct and pretty strong in the data. So real quickly, is it working? Everyone always asks me that. They're like, but does it work? How can you tell? It's like the point of looking at cognitive practice is to actually not so much to say it's working because we had a result, but it's working because we're trying. It's working because we have transformed our intentions. We have publicly signaled that we believe in this particular agreement, and we're moving into it. But at the same time, there are actually a lot of reporting, so you can start to get at it. So what I did is I looked at those schools that had signed at least 5 to 6 agreements, and I looked at their greenhouse gas reports that they're documents. And of the 24 some, they showed a 1.25% cumulative gross greenhouse gas emission reduction. And that was 62% of those 24, so it's like, what, 17, 18 of them? But at the same time, and this is like, this makes certain people like smoke come out of their ears when they see this next stat. My boss is just like, that can't be. I'm like, no, it's true. Because a different 62% of those same 4, so a different combination of the same schools showed a 4.77 increase in their net greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the difference between the gross and net has a lot to do with scope 3, which is, you know, like your transportation, transportation emissions and all that stuff. So that may be part of this, but it's really going to need a little bit more work. Now, this was taken from their 5-year progress reports. So I see you have 2 minutes. So, you know, there's still a lot of work to do, and certain things don't show until they've, you know, been in place for a particularly long time. So, transition planning looks at a timeline of 25 to 50 years out for a change to show. So this is not, I'm not so sure about this, but I am sure absolutely about this one. Does anybody know what this is? 126 megawatts of renewable energy credits or offsets purchased by those 24 schools. That's a lot of green power. That's a lot of optional green power that nobody made them buy. Nobody held a gun to their head and said, you got to buy renewable energy credits. This is like, because they are part of these agreements, they have actually chosen to do this. And so this is supporting the renewable energy industry, and so you're actually seeing it this a big change. This could be like a whole new wind farm online. This could be 2 whole wind farms online. It could be a lot of solar panels on a lot of roofs. So you are seeing every solar panel, somebody had to make it, and somebody had to had a job putting it up. And so you're starting to see that these changes are actually moving us to transition. So I believe that we actually are starting to transition. And so this is what I think is sort of like, these are my sort of summation, is that the university transition is starting to show some changes, some actual physical changes, but most importantly, developing a culture of measurement as a form of change. This is probably the biggest thing I found, that measuring is not just measuring is change. And there was quite a lot of strong wording about that in these documents. There's also a really strong culture of transparency and openness. Everything's public. You don't say, oh, God, we didn't do very well this year, so we're not going to show that. It's like, no, it's all published. ACUPCC, if you don't fill out your progress report on time, they actually will kick you out. So because you're not being open, you're not keeping data. And then teaching has a lot of forms. Some of them are actually just by doing. Like Prescott, we have solar panels everywhere. We have, pervious paving. We have just so much stuff of what we do is itself teaching, and the universities are actually leading this transition. Another gratuitous Chatham picture. So the references, which I'm sure you don't want to see, and this is actually Chatham campus and Prescott. So, and I have 12 seconds.
So you can see Mary kept us as a committee pretty busy. Lots to read. All right, so people must have questions. Yes.
Okay, so when you have those big giant boxes,
Oh yeah. The big positional maps. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so with the big positional maps,
Yeah.
what were you actually evaluating to say, okay, this one's going to get this, because you had statements up there, but
Yeah.
some programs would fall like, here's this one, and the same program is then over there, but on a different statement.
I looked at their mission statements, I looked at their vision statements, I looked at newsletters, websites, and I basically did a content analysis of that, and then using grounded theory methods, sort of like looked through for the patterns and coded them, and I put them on the map. That's why they can be in more than one place. Because it might be the mission one, that pretty much came directly from mission statements, but the rest of them were actually through all the documentation of an institution.
Delightful. How do American universities compare with universities internationally?
That's really interesting. So International Sustainable Campuses Network is actually got some international institutions. There's a completely new association that is out of Malaysia that I just couldn't get the data in enough time to get it into this report. STARS just accepted it as doing a pilot in Europe. In general, they're good, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes, I think in some ways, American institutions are more conscious. I went to Eindhoven in November. I was invited by the Dutch government and Eindhoven University to present this research. I spent 3 days there, and they didn't know that they had their own sustainability coordinator at Eindhoven, and they didn't know that they participated in the STARS pilot. They were like, this is like Rob Robin, Ron Voorhees, Adrian Smith, like these are like the gods of transition studies, right? And they're like, we're STARS? I'm like, yes, you are. How do we do that? I'm like, you should have a sustainability coordinator. And they're like, do we have one? I'm like, I don't know. I'll try to find out for you. So some poor person is. So I think that they have advantages. Yeah, somebody's going to get nailed. Like, guess what? You're a sustainability coordinator. That's how I got my job. So I think in some ways they have the advantage of they do have this national structure. So they have like renewable energy goals and policies. In another way, though, I think that in Europe in particular, they tend to think that's a government-level problem. They were the most skeptical of any change actually happening at a voluntary level. Europeans don't think that you can do it voluntarily. They think you must have a federal policy, a national policy to do it, or an EU-level policy to do it. So when I showed them this, I just got grilled. Just grilled on that. So I think it's like a little bit of both. they're way more conscious than we are. That bike thing is just awesome. I tell them it's beautiful. Except, you know what? I now live in fear of the bicycle pal. They're as dangerous on their bikes as we are in our cars. So, right.
I had a similar question just relating to how long have sustainability coordinators been on universities and to be fair in public schools at all?
There are some. Let's see. I started my job in 2007, which is when we signed the President's Climate Commitment, and Chatham was one of the charter schools. I think Prescott may have been, but then there was a presidential transition. So about that time is when people started realizing if we were going to manage all this stuff, there had to be a person to do it. And the U.S. Green Building Council is actually working on programs similar to this for schools, for like K-12. And so I think you're going to start to see more sustainability coordinators in those level of schools. Right now it's mostly universities. I thought, yes.
I just want to make a quick comment because I was doing this work at Northland. The number of greenhouse gas emissions going up, I wonder if that isn't a bit of a soft number because we're better able to track, especially those scope 3.
I think that's actually very true. As you work through these agreements, you sort of get a better sense of what data you need to track and how you need to track it, and that's very true. Our carbon footprint went up, not because it went up, but because I finally had the data. Like, I didn't know when I started how many commuters we had. Oh, there was one other slide. I almost forgot. I promised everybody I would share this one. This was part of our conversations. Transcriptionists. Everybody was asking about it. And so Sarah Nyder Perry of Perry Transcription Services has done work for lots of Prescott students, and she loves it. She's actually a court reporter who got really bored of court reporting. I found her on Craigslist, asked her if she could transcribe some of my data back when I was doing the transition group, and she did it on a flyer, and she loved it, and it's just sort of steamrollered for her. So, yes.
So Mary, this is great work, and it's been a pleasure to work with you over these years. I think you should have an art installation for some of the visuals that you created for this. It's a whole new realm.
I have some really, really pretty ones at home, but I felt like they didn't tell any story. They were just gorgeous.
A question that we didn't pursue as much in the process was you mentioned the role of government sort of being, noticeable for its silence.
Yes.
Has there been any reaction to this? Is there a sense of, the government's starting to register that this means something? And then also, you did mention the role of corporations. Are they partners with these efforts? Are they antagonists? Maybe just share a little bit about those two spheres since they are so salient in a lot of things that happen in our world.
Yeah, one of the things I think that universities were actually saying is that we need to take the lead. We're filling this gap for government, and I think the government sort of held back and watched to see what happened, and now they're seeing that there actually is a reduction. So the EPA has just recently reached out to some of these schools to say, oh, this structure seems to actually work well. The EPA works with voluntary agreements, but they're usually in lieu of a lawsuit or a more restrictive rule. This is the first time they ever had anybody just say, hey, we have an idea. So they're now working with, I think it's with ASHE, to look a little bit more in depth about how a more volunteer program and that would work. There's actually a very similar agreement called the U.S. Mayor's Climate Commitment that actually is what ACPC is modeled after, that sprang up right after we dropped out of Kyoto. So it works almost exactly the same way. So there are a bunch of cities that are doing it, and those cities are showing reductions, and so the government, I think the national government is actually finally noticing. What was the second part again?
Corporations.
Corporations. Oh, there are a lot that are actually in there. So there are corporations that are part of this agreement and part of these groups. I could call them, some of my other maps actually, like the colored dots are just the businesses and corporations that are part of it. There's a completely different sort of sustainability agreement that's pretty extensive, and it actually probably does a better job on the social dimension of sustainability, called the Global Reporting Initiative. That's almost entirely for businesses. My husband is a compliance director for LEEDS. He's sitting back there. And the GRI reporting is actually a big part of his job. We kind of have like corporate and university versions of the same job, which makes for really boring dinner conversations sometimes. but there are businesses that are actually engaged themselves in these programs. And they like I said, they seem to have a more conscious social dimension than a lot of these. They just got like stars and a couple other will just kind of barely gloss over fair wage, things like that. They kind of like, yeah, we do it. Can we talk about something else? So, okay, there's my bell. That it?